Today we have a wonderful speaker for you, Gabe Neville, who has journeyed all the way up from Virginia to share a story of the Germans, the Pennsylvania Germans, the Virginia Germans, the Revolutionary War, the Continental Line, and that great valley that stretches from the Lehigh Valley all the way down to the Shenandoah Valley. So without any further ado, we're going to get right to it. Please give a warm welcome for Gabe Neville.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jill. And thank you all for coming to listen to me for an hour. I'll be as entertaining as I possibly can. But let's start with some guys who are not particularly entertaining. Who knows who these guys are? How about the other guy? That is Pope Leo X, the guy who excommunicated Martin Luther. All right. So we're going to be talking about Pennsylvania Germans or Pennsylvania Dutch, which is accurate because Germany wasn't a country back then. We're going to be talking about Pennsylvania Germans in the Virginia Continental Line. That might sound confusing to you, but by the end of the hour, it won't be anymore. But I want to start with some prehistory just to understand a little bit about the Germans and why they were here to begin with. A little bit about German theology, or Lutheran theology, which figures importantly in the story. Now, I do need to pause and take a moment of personal privilege. My mother is going to be walking in here in a moment. She's late. So she's right there. And my sister. You know, they have reserved seats for you guys up here, but you're okay where you are. That's my mom and my sister. Say hi, everybody. So there was lots of bad language in this originally. I had to cut it out because my mom was going to be here. So we're going to go back in time to the beginning of the Reformation just for a couple of minutes so that some things I say later make some sense. So you know who these guys are. Now, what you might not know is that the first country to adopt Lutheranism as its state church was, Mom, you're not allowed to answer. Does anybody else know? Sweden. So that is King Gustav Vasa. My mother is Swedish, 100%, so I'm half Swedish. He fought for Sweden's independence from the Three Crowns joint monarchy, which was the Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, dominated by Denmark, and adopted Lutheranism as the official church of Sweden within a few years of Martin Luther and his theses. Now, what is unique about that is that when he did it, he just turned the entire church infrastructure over to Lutheranism, bishops and all. In Germany, it was a very different story. You had certain princes in the Holy Roman Empire, which was a hodgepodge of, I think, hundreds of different little principalities and bishoprics and duchies. Some of them became Lutherans, some of them stayed Catholic, some of them became Calvinists, and they fought and fought and fought for a long time. But in Sweden, it was peaceful and orderly. And the consequence of the difference in the Holy Roman Empire is that the Lutherans ditched the episcopacy. There were no bishops, and that becomes important later in America. Now, Gustav Vasa's grandson, he's usually called Gustavus Adolphus by English speakers. In Swedish, it's Gustav II Adolf, or Gustav den andre Adolf. He was called the Lion of the North. And during the 30 Years' War, which was all about that religious fighting in the Holy Roman Empire, he came down from the big Protestant military power, Sweden, and weighed in, and he was also a military genius. That's him on his horse at the Battle of, I can't remember what, during the 30 Years' War. And at the Peace of Westphalia, they decided, okay, you know what, we're tired of fighting. Each prince in the Holy Roman Empire can pick a religion, and they can just be what they want to be. So that's the backstory. Now, Gustav den andre Adolf had an empire. Like empires back then, he decided he needed a colony. And here it is. We now call it Delaware. Not exactly. It was Delaware, southeastern Pennsylvania along the Delaware River, and southern New Jersey. It only existed from 1638 to 1654, I think, when the Dutch took it, and then the British took it. But the log cabin, the quintessentially American log cabin, actually comes from Sweden. Actually, more specifically from Finland, which was part of Sweden at the time. So there's an important heritage, particularly in Pennsylvania, from New Sweden. So that's the backstory there on Sweden. Now let's go to Germany. Now, as I said, Germany didn't exist yet. It was the Holy Roman Empire. 100 different countries or principalities with an emperor who was elected by, most of the time, 7 electors who were princes who had the power to participate in the election of the emperor. One of those electors was the Count of the Palatinate, which is the Rhine River Valley. Now, and you can see that the line at the top, or I guess it's sort of in the middle, that is a timeline showing what religious faith the elector of the Palatinate was. He was originally Catholic, and then that little L there, he was Lutheran, and then they became Reformed, which is Calvinist, then Lutheran again, then Reformed. Then you had the 30 Years' War, and the Palatinate was occupied by the Catholics, and then it became Reformed again, and then the last Reformed prince, Count, had no children, and a cousin who was Catholic came in and took over. Down below, you see all the wars that are going on all that time. And the people who lived in the Palatinate got sick of it. You would too. So by the time, just before 1700, that the Catholics came back and ruled the Palatinate, the population was very heavily Protestant. And they'd had it, and they didn't really want to live under a Catholic prince, so they headed for America. That arrow here on the bottom center is coming from the Palatinate down the Rhine River to Rotterdam, where they would get on boats and sail for America. A similar thing was happening in Northern Ireland, where you had Protestants in a predominantly Catholic Ireland who were not only not Catholic, but they were mostly Presbyterians and not treated well by the Anglicans. They wanted to get out of Dodge and go to America too. And they all came to Philadelphia, where they get off boats and migrate west. But I'm going to put a pin in that for a second. Some of the first Palatines, so these are the Protestant German-speaking people from the Rhine, from the county Palatine, or the province of the Palatine elector. They were welcomed by Queen Anne as refugees and sent to New York in 1710 to process tar for the British Navy. And that was the first large migration of Protestant German refugees from the Rhine Valley. The tar-making thing was a big mistake and a big disaster, and they didn't stay there. But that is a historic marker in upstate New York. Among those Palatine refugees was this guy, Conrad Weiser. Does anybody know who he is? See, a couple hands go up. Very important in the history of Pennsylvania. So he was a kid when he came as a refugee. After the Livingston manor, the tar-making exercise failed, his family moved west, but he was allowed to go live with the Mohawk Indians for a year. I don't know why. I'm sure someone knows why. But he was fluent in Indian language, comfortable with the Indians, and when he grew up, he became a very important Indian diplomat for the Penn family. And he kept a diary, and that top quote is them coming to America from the Rhine via London. And the second quote is them actually arriving to burn tar and cultivate hemp for the Queen. So that's how they first came. And that is his property in Berks County. It's a state park. I think they're not 100% sure that was his house. It might have been built later. There's another house in Montgomery County. It's now called Pennypacker Mills. Some of you are familiar with it. That was built by another of the Palatine refugees who initially went to New York, named Yost Hite. After the failure of the tar burning mission, he, instead of going to western New York like the Weisers did, he came south to Pennsylvania, to what's now Montgomery County. The 3 right bays of that house are original. He built that house in, I think, 1718. It was later owned by Samuel Pennypacker, also a descendant of German immigrants and the governor of Pennsylvania around the turn of the last century. So the house, the wraparound porch and the fancy windows and all of that are new. But the three right bays were Yost Hite's house. Another of the refugees to New York. Now, I'm going to go back in time again. Most of you will know who the guy on the left is. Raise your hand if you don't know. I'm not going to out you. That's William Penn on the left. On the right is someone I wouldn't expect any of you to know. That is William Berkeley, who was a 17th century governor of Virginia. So that is Penn as a young man. He was younger than Berkeley. I don't know what was up with the armor back then, but they're both wearing armor. Very, very different people. So when William Penn becomes the governor of Pennsylvania, we all know the story because we're all Pennsylvanians. He was welcoming to people of different faiths. He gave property out in small amounts so that yeoman farmers could own property instead of to wealthy land speculators like George Washington, who acquired land by the thousands of acres. Berkeley was very different. He was very intolerant religiously. He imposed the Church of England as the Church of Virginia. You could not be a Quaker, you could not be anything else, and if you were, you got kicked out. Virginia had a state church. It was the Church of England. You had to, by law, go to an Anglican church at least once a month. You had to tithe to the Anglican church. In other words, pay taxes to the Anglican church. Your wedding was recorded by the Church of England, or it wasn't legitimate. And there are other things too. But Virginia was very, very different religiously from Pennsylvania. Also not diverse. It was English and only English for a long, long time. So very different guys, but both governors of two almost neighboring colonies. And at that time, actually intersecting colonies, we'll talk about. Now, Berkeley's successor, Governor Spotswood, welcomed the first colony of Germans to Virginia in 1718 to what's now called Germana. And they were going to work the gold mines that he thought were there. There wasn't any gold. But they came for similar reasons to why they went to New York. Their experiment didn't work out too well either. They were indentured servants in both cases, and when they were free from their indentures, they founded that church on the right, Hebron Lutheran Church. It is, my understanding, it is the oldest Lutheran church in America, and it's still there and still has an active congregation. However, that church, they had to support their own pastor. They had to maintain their own building, and they had to tithe to the Church of England. But they had to maintain all of the upkeep for that church and for the local Anglican vestry and parish, which wasn't great. Now, back to Pennsylvania. Remember I said that the Palatines and the Scotch-Irish would get off the ships in Pennsylvania, or in Philadelphia, which was sort of the Ellis Island of colonial America. All of the land in southeastern Pennsylvania was more or less taken. There were also strong feelings about the Palatine immigrants, just like there are strong feelings about immigrants today. So they would go west. Lancaster was sort of the beginning, or Berks County was sort of the beginning of German population density. But they kept going through York, out to where the shaded area is the Cumberland Valley. The road they were on was called the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road. I call it the Oregon Trail of colonial America. It went from Philadelphia all the way to Augusta, Georgia. And all of Appalachia was settled on that road. So they would go west to the Cumberland Valley. It would dip down through the narrow part of the Maryland Panhandle, and then into Virginia. That's the Shenandoah Valley. Geologically speaking, it's the same thing as the Cumberland Valley. And then continuing south. You can see that it's a little bit cluttered with lots of text there, but you see, in Virginia, you see Berkeley County, named after the governor I mentioned, so properly pronounced Barkley, but nobody says that. Frederick County and Dunmore County, named after another Virginia governor. Those were the three German counties, heavily German counties in Virginia. The eastern border of those counties is the Blue Ridge. And the reason they were welcomed to settle there is to have a buffer. Those Anglican, snooty English Virginians in Williamsburg wanted some riffraff between them and the Indians in case there was any unpleasantness. And that's where how the Germans and the Scotch-Irish originally began to settle the Shenandoah Valley. The first large group was the family and friends of Isaac Hite, who built that house in Montgomery County, Pennypacker Mills. So that's how the Germans, or German speakers, because there's still no Germany, came to Virginia. Now, to you all who are from Lehigh County or nearby, these all look like old houses, and simply old houses. In Virginia, they don't look like just simple old houses. They look like Pennsylvania houses. These are houses from the 18th century that are in the Shenandoah Valley. You will not see houses like this around Williamsburg or in Fairfax County, where I live in Virginia. This is not Virginia architecture. This is Pennsylvania architecture. I'm not a specialist in architecture, but my understanding is that the defining feature is that the chimney is inside the wall of the house. I took these pictures to show you, not realizing that the walls would be covered with very similar pictures in this room. I included these pictures to show you some of the ancestors of the Virginia houses that are in Pennsylvania. The one at the bottom left is the Hans Herr house in Lancaster, the oldest house in Lancaster. This is more typical of Virginia. An exterior chimney and a really, really big one. That's bigger than normal, but that's what Virginia architecture tends to look like. So if you go to the Shenandoah Valley in Pennsylvania and you look at the old stuff, you can see signs of German settlement still. Okay, back to Pennsylvania again. The guy on the right is Dad, and the guy on the left is his son. The guy on the right is Heinrich Muhlenberg, Henry Muhlenberg. Now you remember back to New Sweden, 1638, you have this colony of Lutherans that comes to southeastern Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. They're all Lutherans, but they're Lutherans according to the Swedish Lutheran tradition, which means that they have a bishop. If you're going to be ordained in the Lutheran Church, the ordination has to be done by a bishop, according to the tradition of apostolic succession, which means that there's a chain of ordination that goes all the way back to Christ's apostles. Muhlenberg is a German Lutheran. They don't bother with all that stuff, right? And you had lots of Lutherans in America, but they weren't organized. The Church of Sweden was still supporting the Swedish churches around Philadelphia, but nobody was supporting or helping or organizing the German Lutherans. So the German Lutherans sent Henry Muhlenberg here in 1742 to kind of organize the church. So he is often referred to as the founder of the Lutheran Church in America. That's not true. They'd been here since 1638. He was the organizer of Lutheranism. But the Swedes never quite they all actually ended up becoming Episcopalians. His son on the left is Peter Muhlenberg. So he is the grandson of Conrad Weiser and the son of Henry Muhlenberg. In other words, he's Pennsylvania royalty. Certainly German Pennsylvania royalty. I'm going to go back to this map. All of these Germans that live here in Berkeley, Frederick, and Dunmore counties, when those counties are divided into those three, they have to form vestries for each county. And the Germans, their attitude is, okay, look, we're Lutherans. It's not that different from being Anglican theologically, but we don't want to have to tithe to two churches. We don't want to have an Anglican vestry and go to a Lutheran church. Can we work something out? So one of the vestry members from the original county, which was Frederick, he literally went up to Pennsylvania, talked to Henry Muhlenberg and said, look, we've got this issue. Can you just find me a German-speaking clergyman who can come down and be our Anglican rector in specifically Dunmore County? And Henry said, sure. How about my son, Peter? So Peter comes down. Actually, he doesn't come down. First, he has to sail to London to get ordained, remember? Anglican pastors have to be ordained by a bishop, and there's no Anglican bishop in the colonies. So he sails to London in 1772, gets ordained, comes back, and becomes the rector of Beckford Parish, which is Dunmore County. That happens in 1772. 2 years later, there's a war brewing, and he is the chairman of the Committee of Correspondence, then the chairman of the Committee of Safety, and then a colonel in the Virginia Provincial Line, and eventually a general. A little bit before he gets his commission as an officer, though, the Continental Congress, for the very first time, recruits Continental soldiers. So this is literally the day before George Washington gets his commission as commander-in-chief. They recruit 10 companies, specifically of riflemen, to go reinforce the army of militia that is surrounding Boston. Pennsylvania is to raise 6, Western Maryland 2, and Virginia 2. So these 2 counties at the very top of the valley, Berkeley and Frederick, each raises 1 company of riflemen to march north to Boston. There are certainly Germans in both of them. Daniel Morgan, who's of course very famous, he had there's a recorded mess. So a mess is like 6 soldiers who eat together and they share a camp kettle. There was a German mess, at least one of them, and one of them continued to meet long after the war, and there's a monument to them in Winchester. This is notable partly because they were called the Dutch mess. I think we in Pennsylvania, we're a little bit uncomfortable with the term Pennsylvania Dutch because it's confusing. People think it's a reference to Holland. Linguistically, Deutsch and Dutch were the exact same word for centuries. And there's still no Deutschland at the time of the Revolutionary War, so it was perfectly proper to call them Dutch or Deutsch. And they're remembered as such here in Virginia. So when the war really starts and violence starts to brew in Virginia, Virginia decides that it needs to raise a bunch of regiments. It raises 2 at first, and then decides it needs another 7. And it looks beyond the Blue Ridge, where all of these Germans and Scotch-Irish Presbyterians are, and wonders, well, are these Germans going to be willing to fight? Right? I mean, it was the crown that helped them escape their Catholic oppressors back in Germany. They might be loyalists. They're not really like the rest of us. Are they really going to join this fight? There was no similar worry about the Scotch-Irish. Everybody knew they would fight. In fact, they might have been too eager to fight. So they thought about it. Peter Muhlenberg is a delegate to the Virginia Convention that is deciding this stuff, and they decide, you know what? Let's raise a German regiment on the far side of the mountains, and we're going to make Peter Muhlenberg the colonel. Then the Germans will enlist, right? So they did it, and it worked well. This is the 8th Virginia Regiment. This is what my book is about. The shaded counties are the counties that the regiment recruited in. The northern part is where the Germans were. Hampshire County had a pretty significant population of Germans as well. The officers, you see the field officers up top. So Peter Muhlenberg is the colonel, German, as you know. Abraham Bowman, who is the grandson of Isaac Hite from Pennypacker Mills, he's the lieutenant colonel. And Peter Helfenstein, who immigrated directly from the Rhine himself as a young man, is the major. So you've got German field officers. You've got the captains listed on the right. I'm not going to go through all of them. None of the captains is German. And I don't think more than about 40% of the soldiers were German. But they wanted German field officers to encourage recruitment amongst the Germans. And I think they wanted, stereotypes die hard, right? I think they wanted orderly German field officers controlling the disorderly Scotch-Irish soldiers, right? Now, in Dunmore County, this is the county where Muhlenberg was the Anglican priest, there were 2 delegates to the Virginia Convention when the regiment was authorized. One of them is Peter Muhlenberg, and the other one is this guy, Jonathan Clark, who was originally from the Piedmont of Virginia. Peter gets his commission as a colonel and immediately returns to the Shenandoah Valley. Jonathan Clark is still Dunmore County's delegate, and he sends this letter with Peter Muhlenberg back to the Committee of Safety. And it says, as Mr. Muhlenberg is returning home, and perhaps the committee may be called to nominate the officers to the German company, not regiment, the German company, before I can return, I beg leave to offer myself to you as a candidate for the captaincy of the German company to be raised in your county. So not only were all 10 companies not German, even in the heart of the German part of the valley, Dunmore County raised 2 companies, and they designated 1 English and 1 German. These are the officers that Committee of Safety in Dunmore County approved. You can see that on the right it says what that's really a language thing. English means not German, kind of like the Amish say English, right? There are some German names here, like Jacob Rinker is the first lieutenant of the German company. He's actually Swiss. His father came from Switzerland. I think Adam Derting is also at least German speaking. Jacob Parrott, the ensign there, he was also from a Swiss family. Here is a Continental Commission for Matthias Hite, who is Yost Hite's grandson and Lieutenant Colonel Bowman's cousin, signed by none other than John Hancock at the bottom. Now here is an absolute gem. As I was researching my book, I got an email from a woman who said she had a letter from her ancestor who was in the 8th. And I was very intrigued and said, can I look at it? I believe, and I'm waiting for someone to prove me wrong, that this is the only surviving letter home to mom and dad from an enlisted Continental soldier from the Revolutionary War. The only one, as far as I know. It's in German. My brother, who was an art historian and quite good with antique German, translated this for me. It says, he said, Gabe, this isn't really normal German. It's sort of a pidgin German. There's English that sneaks into it. He just says, God greets you, father and mother, brothers and sisters. I hope this letter will find you all healthy. And I'm also healthy, and God be thanked 1,000-fold. And we are in Suffolk, is a town in southeastern Virginia. And because of the war, I have most unusually for me written you a letter. And when you can, send a letter on down as quickly as you can. And we were 3 weeks and 2 days on the journey, so much from me. It's kind of nice, huh? He deserted 3 weeks later. But they caught him and brought him back. The reason is, when they first became soldiers, they were not Continental soldiers. They were Virginia provincial soldiers. In other words, their job was to protect Virginia. The Virginia regiments were later taken into the Continental Line, into congressional pay, in other words. But when Major General Charles Lee decided that they needed to go protect Charleston, it was literally not their job. And they didn't like it. And a bunch of guys deserted, and the folks at home thought they were justified in deserting. They did send officers to go catch them, and some were caught, including Heinrich Meyer. So this is not a presentation on the 8th Virginia, but I'll just tell you, they went south to the Battle of Sullivan's Island. Major General Lee decided he was then going to invade Florida. You don't hear about Florida in the context of the Revolution very often. They went south. They didn't make it to Florida because they all got malaria. A bunch of them died, and they hobbled back to Virginia in December. Meanwhile, Virginia decides that they need to recruit even more soldiers. First they raised the 1st and 2nd, then the 3rd through 9th, and then the 3rd authorization was the 10th through 15th regiments. The 12th regiment was raised in a very similar geography to the 8th, including that German area there, Berkeley, Frederick, Dunmore, Hampshire counties. And there were Germans, including some German officers in the 12th Virginia as well. The 8th and the 12th were both put in Charles Scott's brigade in 1777. That's the group at the bottom there. And William Woodford's brigade and Charles Scott's brigade were both in Major General Adam Stevens' division. Stephen had spent his career serving not quite alongside, more like a little bit underneath George Washington, and he resented it. He actually lost an election to George Washington in the 1750s. Washington was the commander-in-chief, and he was only a major general. And things got sour, and he eventually got disciplined after the Battle of Germantown and cashiered out of the Continental Line. So he's an interesting character. He also got as the sheriff of Berkeley County at the top of that map. He foreclosed on the property of Jacob Hite. Remember the commission I showed you, Matthias Hite? His father got in financial trouble, and Sheriff Adam Stephen came and took his property, including his slaves. And that sparked a big fight, an ongoing rivalry between the Hites, which includes the Bowmans and various cousins and descendants and friends, and Adam Stephen. So when the knives were out for Stephen, I'm virtually certain that the Germans in the lower or northern Shenandoah Valley had a lot to do with him losing his job. Now, back to the Pennsylvania Dutch in Virginia. The top here, this is an account from a soldier in the 12th who was from the Scotch-Irish part of the Shenandoah Valley. He wrote 1777, on July 2nd, there was a detachment of 150 riflemen chosen from among the Virginia regiments. So these are the regiments in Charles Scott's brigade, dispatched under the command of Captain James Dark, a Dutchman, belonging to the 8th Virginia Regiment, to watch the enemy's motions. Now, the events described there are not important. What's important here is that he's calling this guy on the right, that's William Dark. He's got his first name wrong. He's also got his ethnicity wrong. He's just assuming that William Dark is German because he's in the 8th Virginia Regiment. Dark's a really fascinating guy. I think I might write a book just on him. But you see a Scotch-Irish guy from the Shenandoah Valley referring to someone he thinks is a Pennsylvania German as a Dutchman. So that's notable. And then down below this, you have another soldier who was actually from Pittsburgh, which was claimed by Virginia back then, saying that he enlisted at Pittsburgh in the state of Pennsylvania in the company commanded by Captain John Stevenson of the 8th Virginia Regiment, commonly called the German Regiment because it was commanded by General Muhlenberg. So he knows that the regiment's not all German, and that it's the officers that are important. I'm not going to go through the battle histories, but these are the fights that the 8th and the 12th were involved in. That's Philadelphia County, now mostly Montgomery County, and Chester County, where I grew up. Lots of fights in 1777. There was a German battalion. Even though the 8th Virginia was only about 40% German, the Continental Congress did raise a regiment or battalion that was specifically German, and it was raised in Maryland and Pennsylvania specifically to recruit Germans. It was a terrible unit. The first colonel, Nicholas Hausiger, was a traitor. At the Battle of Princeton, he defected to the British. His successor was described as an indolent, worthless creature. A lieutenant colonel had a mean and vindictive temper. He withheld food from the troops if he didn't like the work they were doing. And the soldiers in that battalion mutinied, not once, not twice, but they were probably also part of the famous mutiny of the Pennsylvania Line, in which case they mutinied 3 times. So not a great record, so we'll just move on from them, huh? Now, going towards the end of the war, the Yorktown campaign. It has been said that something like 1/3 of the soldiers in the Revolution were Germans, including Hessians, right? So on both sides. In the months before the siege of Yorktown, Baron von Steuben was sent to Virginia to take command. He's a major general. Peter Muhlenberg is a brigadier general, so one step down. He is the only remaining general in active duty in the Virginia Continental Line. Washington, of course, is a general, but we're not counting him. Muhlenberg is the only active duty general left in Virginia. So he's on the ground taking care of business when Steuben shows up. Lafayette then comes to help as well. Isaac Hite, on the right, he is Muhlenberg's aide-de-camp, and he is another grandson of Yost Hite from Pennypacker Mills. So Steuben is in charge, Muhlenberg's number 2, and a Virginian, and Hite is Muhlenberg's aide-de-camp. And so the three of them together play a very important role in the defense of Virginia in the months leading up to the siege of Yorktown. If you read the first biography of Peter Muhlenberg, written by his great nephew, he argues that Alexander Hamilton, who's seen the play Hamilton? Only a few, wow. Yeah, the movie. Muhlenberg's first biography argues that Alexander Hamilton stole credit for the attack on Redoubt 10 from Peter Muhlenberg. Muhlenberg was in charge of that operation. Hamilton may have been sort of physically out front in the operation. Muhlenberg was actually wounded in the operation, so it's clear that he was there. Because he was wounded, I think in the hand, Hamilton wrote the report, which became the record. And so Hamilton, according to the first Muhlenberg biography, that's why Hamilton gets all the credit for that storming of Redoubt 10 at Yorktown. And then Hamilton, of course, dies in a duel, and nobody wants to say anything bad about him. And so that it became historical fact as far as anybody's concerned. So why does all this matter? Why does it matter that we had Pennsylvania Germans fighting in the Virginia Continental Line? Attitudes changed a lot during the Revolutionary War. When the war broke out, you had 13 colonies that had very little to do with each other. The New England colonies were culturally close to each other, but Massachusetts and Pennsylvania had very little in common. Pennsylvania and Virginia had very little in common. In fact, they didn't even like each other. The roads connecting them were very poor. There's far more commerce and interaction between Pennsylvania and England and Virginia and England than there was between Pennsylvania and Virginia. Virginia and Pennsylvania actually fought a war. I mean, not a real war, but there was violence over the Pennsylvania part of, or the Pittsburgh part of Pennsylvania. And if you go all the way back to the 1750s, you've got Benjamin Franklin complaining about all of these Palatine German immigrants. He says, "Why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them? And will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion." Sounds like modern rhetoric, doesn't it? Now, fast forward, one of those Palatine Boers, Peter Muhlenberg, at the bottom, that's his signature, P. Muhlenberg, VP. He's the vice president of Pennsylvania. Do you know who the president of Pennsylvania was in 1786? Ben Franklin. So times have changed, right? And this is very late in Franklin's life, and he's old and not really healthy enough to do the job of president. Plus, he's distracted by things like writing the Constitution of the United States. So Peter Muhlenberg is the de facto president of Pennsylvania at this point. He's also elected to Congress, elected to be a senator, and then when Thomas Jefferson took office, he got a patronage job at the Port of Philadelphia. Good money. So times had really changed. And the Continental Army really did this. When those first riflemen that Daniel Morgan took to Boston got there. If you go to the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, there's a display that shows the Virginia riflemen and the Massachusetts soldiers in a fist fight, and George Washington's breaking up the fight. This really happened. They didn't like each other. They hated each other. The Continental Army brought America together in really important ways, North and South. For a long time, the Germans remembered this as something that was really important because they remembered back when people thought like Franklin had once. And in 1910, the Pennsylvania Germans collected money for a statue of Peter Muhlenberg to recognize his role in Pennsylvania history, and erected the statue that was put at City Hall in Philadelphia. It's at that spot in the picture on the left. During World War I, it was removed and put behind the Philadelphia Art Museum. Sometimes people say it's because it was World War I and everybody hated Germans. That's evidently not true. Apparently they needed to move stuff to dig a hole for the subway. But that's a pretty wonderful statue of Peter Muhlenberg. The Continental Army and, in some ways, the Germans and the Scotch-Irish from the Valley also knit America together east and west. People who lived in the West, in the Shenandoah Valley, and then later in Kentucky or Ohio, they felt there were similar sentiments that you might hear today, comments about flyover country and the coastal elites. People felt the same way then. The soldiers that I've been talking about, they were frontiersmen, many of them, and they were certainly from the West. They were not elite people from the East, but they served in important roles in the war. And they went on to do things like ratify the Constitution at the Virginia Convention, Ratification Convention, and to go west and found new states in the West and become very important people. That log house is Abraham Bowman, grandson of Yost Hite from Pennypacker Mills. That's his frontier log cabin in Kentucky. If the log cabin was the mobile home of the Continental era, this is a double wide. It's got 2 stories. It has a basement, which log houses never have, and a very cool exterior stairway going up to the second floor. So Pennsylvania Germans, the Pennsylvania Dutch, played an important role in the Revolutionary War in Pennsylvania, but also in Virginia. This is my website for more on the 8th Virginia Regiment. I have a new website, which is about Virginia more broadly in the Revolutionary War. And this is my book, if you'd like to buy one.